"Will you marry my daddy?" a little cowboy asked. The abandoned bride thought her life was over. The sun was just beginning to rise over Red Mesa, painting the desert cliffs in soft shades of orange and gold. Dust swirled along the empty streets of the small frontier town, and the faint hum of hover wagons could be heard in the distance. It was the kind of place where strangers were noticed, and everyone had a story, whether they wanted to tell it or not. Lila Hartley stepped off the creaking hover coach, adjusting the wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. She had arrived in Red Mesa without much more than a small satchel and the heavy weight of disappointment she carried in her chest. Her wedding had been canceled at the last moment, and the man she thought loved her had vanished, leaving her to wonder if she would ever trust anyone again. Red Mesa's streets were quiet that morning. Most of the townsfolk were already busy at work, running the trading posts, repairing their hover wagons, or tending the small robotic miners that drilled the cliffs outside town. Lila, hoping to keep a low profile, walked toward the inn at the center of the town. The inn was a simple, weathered building of sun-baked wood and metal panels. A small sign swung in the breeze, reading, "Red Mesa Rest." Lila pushed open the door, and a small bell announced her arrival. The air inside smelled of coffee, dust, and old leather. "Morning, ma'am," said a young clerk behind the counter. "Looking for a room?" "Yes," Lila replied softly. "For a few days, maybe more." The clerk nodded, handing her a worn key. "Room 3, second floor. Don't mind the creaks, it's part of the charm." Lila took the stairs slowly, her heart still heavy. She set her bag on the small bed and looked out the window. From there, she could see the town square and the open desert beyond. She had wanted a fresh start, somewhere no one knew her story. She hoped Red Mesa would be that place. As she unpacked her few belongings, a small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Are you staying here alone?" Lila turned to see a boy, no more than 7, standing in the doorway. He wore a cowboy hat far too big for his small head and had dusty boots that had seen better days. His wide, curious eyes looked up at her. Yes, I am," she said gently. "Who are you?" "I'm Tommy Briggs," he said proudly. "I live over there." He pointed across the square to a small house with a broken fence. "That's my dad's place. He's busy with work, but I don't like being alone." "You look like someone who needs a friend." Lila smiled faintly. She hadn't spoken to a child in months. Her world had been filled with adults who had disappointed her, but there was something honest about Tommy's stare, something that made her feel light. "Maybe," she said softly. "Maybe we can be friends for a little while." Tommy's eyes lit up. He walked closer, brushing the dust from his sleeves. "Do you know what would make me really happy?" he asked. "If you married my daddy." Lila blinked, startled. The boy's question was so sudden, so pure, that she couldn't help laughing. "Oh, Tommy," she said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "That's very sweet, but your daddy and I don't even know each other." Tommy frowned, looking serious. "That's okay. I think you would like him. He's a good man. He's kind. And I think you're kind, too. So, will you marry my daddy?" Lila's heart ached in an unexpected way. She thought her life was over when she had been left at the altar, but here was this small boy, so full of hope, imagining a future she hadn't dared to believe in. She didn't answer. She just looked out the window again, at the sun rising over the desert, and for the first time in weeks she felt a small spark of hope. Before she could say anything more, the inn door opened with a loud creak, and a gust of wind carried in dust from the desert. Lila tensed, but it was only a delivery droid, rolling in with boxes of supplies. Still, the moment reminded her that life in Red Mesa wasn't going to be quiet for long. That afternoon, Lila took a walk around the town square, hoping to get a sense of the place. The townsfolk were friendly but cautious. Red Mesa wasn't lawless, but it had its share of trouble. The sheriff, a tall man with a weathered face and a mechanical arm, watched the streets from the steps of the courthouse. Rumor had it he collected more than taxes from traders and miners, and that few dared to cross him. As Lila wandered, she noticed Tommy trailing behind, pretending to inspect the cracks in the pavement. He followed her like a shadow, occasionally glancing up with hopeful eyes. "Tommy, why do you keep following me?" she asked, trying not to laugh. "I'm making sure you don't get lost," he said matter-of-factly. "And because I want you to like my daddy." Lila's chest tightened again. The boy's innocence was almost too much to bear. She bent down and ruffled his hair. "You're very brave for such a little cowboy," she said. "I'll think about your question." Just as they were walking back toward the inn, a commotion erupted near the trading post. A group of rough-looking men, clearly hired enforcers, were arguing with a miner. Lila recognized them as the sheriff's men. She tried to turn away, hoping to avoid trouble, but Tommy tugged her hand. "Come on, let's see what's happening," he whispered, eyes wide with curiosity. Reluctantly, Lila followed. She watched as the men threatened the miner, demanding extra pay for protection. The miner's hands shook as he handed over credits, and Lila's stomach twisted with anger. She had thought Red Mesa might be quiet, safe, but it was clear that danger lingered even here. Tommy noticed her frown. "Don't worry," he said. "My daddy would stop them if he saw this." Lila smiled faintly. "I hope he does." That evening, Lila sat on the small bed in her room, thinking about the day. Tommy's question kept echoing in her mind. "Will you marry my daddy?" She knew the boy was only a child, but the sincerity in his eyes had shaken something inside her. She had spent months hiding from heartbreak, but this little cowboy's simple hope was a reminder that life could surprise her. Suddenly a soft sound came from the corner of the room. A faint scraping, like someone trying to move quietly. Lila froze, her heart pounding. She had taken every precaution to remain unnoticed, yet someone had entered her room. Her hand went to the small knife she kept hidden under her pillow, and she moved slowly toward the sound. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. There was no answer. The sound stopped. Lila held her breath, straining her ears. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the room fell silent. She knew one thing for certain. Her past wasn't done with her yet. Red Mesa was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to heal, but someone had followed her here, and they weren't leaving quietly. Lila sank onto the bed, exhaustion and fear battling with the small spark of hope Tommy had given her. The little cowboy's question had reminded her that she could still feel, still care. But now, more than ever, she knew that survival in this town would require courage, cleverness, and perhaps a little luck. Outside, the desert winds whispered through the town, carrying the promise of new beginnings and the threat of trouble lurking just around the corner. Lila didn't know what the next day would bring, but she did know one thing. She couldn't ignore the little cowboy, the sheriff's enforcers, or the shadow from her past. As night fell over Red Mesa, she made a silent promise to herself. She would not hide. She would not run. She would face whatever came, for herself, and for the small boy who believed in a better tomorrow. And somewhere in the quiet of the desert night, Tommy Briggs dreamed of the day his daddy would meet the brave woman who had captured his heart, and maybe, just maybe, his father's too. The sun rose over Red Mesa with a harsh glare, turning the desert rocks to molten gold. Lila Hartley had spent a restless night in her small inn room, listening to the wind sweep through the town. She could not stop thinking about the faint noise she had heard the night before, the sound of someone moving in her room. Whoever it was, they had left without being seen, but Lila knew one thing. She wasn't safe here. Tommy Briggs arrived at the inn early, bouncing with energy as usual. "Good morning, Lila," he chirped, holding his wide-brimmed hat in his hands. "I brought breakfast for us." He had stuffed 2 small packages with bread and dried fruit. "Daddy says we need energy if we're going to have adventures." Lila smiled softly, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Tommy," she said. "I think we might have an adventure today, whether we want or not." Tommy tilted his head, curiosity sparkling in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Before Lila could answer, a shadow fell across the inn's entrance. A tall figure, wearing a long duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, stepped inside. The metallic glint of a holster at his hip caught the morning light. Lila's stomach tightened. She knew this type of man well. He was one of the sheriff's enforcers, a bounty hunter, or perhaps both. She had no idea why he was looking for her, but one thing was certain. She had to leave Red Mesa, and fast. Tommy, unaware of the danger, waved at the man cheerfully. "Good morning." The stranger's eyes flipped to the boy and back to Lila. He did not smile. "Lila Hartley," he said in a low voice. "You're coming with me." Lila's heart raced. "I don't think so," she replied firmly. "You don't know what you're asking." The man's hand hovered near his holster. "You have no choice." Tommy's small hands clenched into fists. "No." "You're not taking her!" he shouted. The enforcer's head jerked toward the boy, as if surprised that such a little one would speak so boldly. But before he could react, Lila grabbed Tommy's hand. "Run!" she yelled. They bolted out the inn door, down the narrow streets of Red Mesa, dust kicking up around their boots. The townsfolk watched in surprise, some whispering, others stepping aside. Lila led Tommy toward the cliffs that edged the town, hoping to find a place to hide. The enforcer chased them, moving faster than any human should, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Lila ducked into a narrow alley, hoping to confuse him. She could hear his heavy breathing behind them, the sound of his mechanical enhancements whirring as he pursued. They reached the edge of the town just as the enforcer caught up. Lila grabbed Tommy and leapt onto a small hover cart abandoned near the cliff's edge. She hit the ignition and the cart lifted slightly, hovering over the uneven ground. The man's boots slammed against the ground as he lunged, but the cart moved too quickly for him. Lila guided it down the canyon path, the cliffs towering above them on either side. Tommy's hair whipped in the wind, and his eyes were wide with both fear and excitement. "You're amazing," he shouted. "I knew you could do it." Lila managed a small smile. "Just hang on, cowboy," she said, keeping her focus on the narrow canyon path. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a hidden trail that led to a series of caves along the cliffs. This was a place Lila had noticed when she first arrived in Red Mesa, but she had not realized it was a refuge for those who wished to escape the sheriff's control. They ducked into the largest cave, panting and covered in dust. Lila pressed her back against the stone wall, trying to calm her racing heart. Tommy, full of energy, immediately ran ahead, exploring the shadows of the cave. "This place is awesome," he whispered. "It's like a secret hideout." Lila chuckled softly, though her mind was still tense. "Yes, it is, but we can't stay here forever. We need help." Tommy's eyes brightened. "Then we'll find help. My daddy always says there's always a way." Lila took a deep breath, thinking. She knew the sheriff's men would not give up so easily. If they wanted her, they would track her across the desert. She needed allies, and fast. The cave led to a small, hidden settlement of miners who had been exiled by the sheriff for refusing to pay extra taxes. Their homes were simple but cleverly hidden among the cliffs, with small droids assisting in their mining work. Lila approached the settlement cautiously, knowing she could not reveal herself too quickly. A miner noticed her first. "Who's there?" he called, gripping a pickaxe. "I mean no harm," Lila said softly. "My name is Lila Hartley. I need help." The miner studied her carefully, then gestured to the others. Soon a small group gathered, curious but cautious. Tommy ran ahead, waving his arms. "She's a friend. She's helping me." The miners relaxed slightly at the boy's words. Their leader, an older woman named Mara, stepped forward. "If you want to stay, you'll need to prove you're not with the sheriff," she said. "He's been sending his enforcers after anyone who helps people like us." Lila nodded. "I understand. I just want to be safe for a while, and I want to keep this boy safe, too." She gestured to Tommy, who stood proudly beside her. Mara looked the boy over and smiled faintly. "You've got a brave one there. We can offer food and shelter, but you'll need to help us, too. The sheriff won't stop at intimidation. He'll come for everything we have if we do nothing." Lila agreed. She knew she couldn't hide forever. If she wanted to survive, she would need to stand and face the danger. Tommy held her hand tightly as they walked further into the settlement, feeling strangely hopeful despite the danger. That night, they sat around a small fire, the warmth cutting through the chill of the desert air. Tommy was sleepy but restless, asking questions about Lila's past and about life beyond Red Mesa. Lila answered as best as she could, careful to keep the darkest parts hidden. "You were going to get married, right?" Tommy asked quietly. Lila nodded, staring into the fire. "Yes, but it didn't work out. Sometimes people let you down even when you trust them the most." Tommy frowned. "That's terrible. But maybe things will be better now. Maybe you can be part of our family instead. You can be my mom, and we'll take care of each other." Lila felt a lump in her throat. She had thought her chance for love and family was over, and yet here was this small cowboy, offering her hope when she had none left. As she watched him drift to sleep, she thought about the day's events, the chase, the danger, and the kindness of the miners. She realized that her life in Red Mesa might be far more complicated than she had imagined, but it could also be full of meaning. Suddenly a faint metallic hum came from the entrance of the cave. Lila's heart skipped a beat. The sheriff's men could track her here. She silently gestured for Tommy to stay back and moved toward the sound, her mind racing. A small droid, disguised as a rock, rolled into the firelight. It had a note attached to it with neat, sharp handwriting. Lila picked it up carefully. "We know where you are. Leave or face the consequences." Sheriff's office. Lila's heart pounded. She looked at Tommy, who was now awake and staring at her with wide eyes. "What does it say?" he asked. Lila swallowed hard. "It says, 'They're coming for us.'" Tommy's small hand found hers. "Then we'll face them together," he said bravely. Lila smiled faintly, squeezing his hand. He was right. She couldn't hide forever. And maybe, just maybe, Red Mesa held a chance for more than survival. It held a chance for courage, family, and a life worth fighting for. Outside, the wind swept through the desert, carrying the promise of adventure and the threat of danger. Lila knew that the next day would bring challenges they had never faced before. But she also knew that she was no longer alone. And with Tommy by her side, she felt ready to meet whatever came. The sun rose slowly over Red Mesa, casting long shadows across the desert cliffs. Inside the hidden settlement of the exiled miners, life was quiet but tense. Lila Hartley stood outside a cave carved into the cliffside, the wind blowing her hair back. Beside her, Tommy Briggs bounced on the balls of his feet, eager to explore but trying to follow the rules. Lila had spent the night thinking carefully. The sheriff's men were not going to give up, and hiding was only a temporary solution. If she wanted to survive and protect Tommy, she needed allies. And the miners, with their knowledge of the cliffs and secret paths, were exactly the allies she needed. Mara, the leader of the miners, approached with a group of men and women carrying simple tools and mining droids. "If we help you," Mara said, "you'll have to help us too. The sheriff has been pressing us for weeks. He wants to take all we've mined. If we do nothing, we'll lose everything." Lila nodded. "I understand. I can help. I know a few ways to outsmart men like your sheriff. And I can teach you to use what you have in ways he doesn't expect." Mara raised an eyebrow. "You speak as if you've dealt with his kind before." Lila looked out at the desert beyond the cliffs. "I have," she said softly, "and I know what they fear most, surprises." Tommy tugged at her sleeve. "What do you mean by surprises?" he asked. Lila smiled faintly. "You'll see soon enough, little cowboy. But first, we need to plan." Inside the main cave, the miners had built a small workshop filled with tools, droids, and crates of supplies. Lila studied the layout carefully. The settlement had natural traps and hidden paths, but it lacked coordination. She began to sketch a plan, showing Mara and the miners how they could use the cliffs, the caves, and even the mining droids to defend themselves if the sheriff attacked. Tommy watched closely, absorbing every word. He loved maps and plans, and he insisted on helping. Lila handed him a small notebook and pencil. "Draw what you see," she said. "You might notice things I miss." Tommy's eyes lit up. "I can do that. Watch this." He carefully traced the cave openings, the paths through the cliffs, and even the small hover carts they could use as distractions. Lila couldn't help but laugh at his dedication. As the day passed, the miners listened to Lila's instructions and practiced. They moved droids into strategic positions, tested ropes and pulleys to create traps, and marked secret paths through the cliffs. Lila was impressed with their quick thinking. "You're better than most adults I've worked with," she said. Mara nodded. "We've had to be careful for a long time. The sheriff doesn't forget, and we don't either." Lila felt a strange sense of pride. For the first time since her wedding fell apart, she felt useful. She could fight back, protect people, and perhaps make a difference. And she could do it for Tommy, who had trusted her so completely. As the sun began to set, Lila climbed to the edge of the cliffs, looking out over the desert. The horizon was a mix of red and gold, beautiful and dangerous all at once. She thought about the sheriff and his men, wondering when they would strike. She knew they wouldn't wait long. Suddenly she spotted movement near the town below. A small group of men, mounted on hover bikes, was approaching. Lila's heart sank. The sheriff's enforcers had found them. She ran back to the cave and shouted to the miners, "Get ready! They're coming!" The miners moved quickly, following the plan Lila had drawn. Tommy clutched her hand tightly, his small face set with determination. "We can do this," he said bravely. Lila nodded. "Yes, we can. Stay close to me, little cowboy." The first enforcer appeared at the cave's entrance, stepping cautiously into the shadows. Lila and the miners had set simple but effective traps, loose rocks, hanging nets, and small droids that would roll out to distract the enemy. The enforcer stumbled over a net, cursing loudly. "Get them!" he shouted, signaling the others, but Lila and the miners were ready. Droids rolled down narrow paths, spraying bright lights and small puffs of smoke. The cliffside traps sent rocks tumbling down, blocking paths and slowing the attackers. Lila's plan was working. Tommy, encouraged by the chaos, ran ahead to pull a rope that released a series of small carts down a slope. The carts collided with hoverbikes, knocking them sideways and forcing the men to retreat. Lila watched him, amazed at his courage. "Good job, Cowboy," she shouted. Mara and the miners pressed their advantage, pushing the enforcers back toward the desert. Lila stayed close to Tommy, guiding him and keeping an eye on the enemy. She could see the sheriff himself arriving in the distance, riding a large hoverbike with a mechanical arm glinting in the sunlight. He stopped at the edge of the canyon, scanning the scene. "Hartley!" he shouted, his voice echoing against the cliffs. "You can't hide forever." Lila stood her ground. "We're not hiding!" she shouted back. "We're ready for you." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He studied the clever layout of traps, the miners' organized movements, and the bravery of a small boy at Lila's side. For a moment he hesitated, realizing that this wouldn't be as easy as he thought. Then he turned to leave. "You've bought yourself some time, Hartley," he said, "but I'll be back." Lila watched as he and his men retreated, their hoverbikes kicking up dust as they disappeared over the horizon. She exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. They had survived the first attack. Tommy hugged her tightly. "We really did it." Lila ruffled his hair, smiling. "Yes, we did, but we need to be ready. He'll come back." That night, the miners gathered around a fire, celebrating their small victory. Lila and Tommy sat together, sharing a simple meal of bread and dried fruit. Mara approached and placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. "You did well today," she said. "Most people would have run. You stood and helped us fight. That counts for a lot." Lila nodded, feeling warmth in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without Tommy," she said, glancing at the boy. "He's brave beyond his years." Tommy grinned. "I told you I'm a little cowboy." The firelight flickered against the cave walls, casting long shadows. Lila thought about her past, about the man who had abandoned her, and about the life she had once dreamed of. That life felt far away now, replaced by something unexpected, something that might be better. She had found people who needed her, a small boy who believed in her, and a purpose beyond herself. As she lay down to rest, Lila's thoughts drifted to the sheriff. He would return, and when he did, the challenge would be even greater. But for the first time in months, she felt ready. She had allies, a plan, and a small cowboy who believed in her. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying both danger and hope. Lila knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, and perhaps new surprises. But she also knew this: she was no longer alone, and she would face whatever came with courage and determination. Tommy curled up beside her, mumbling sleepily. "Tomorrow we win again, right?" Lila kissed the top of his head. "Yes, little cowboy. Tomorrow we win again." And as the stars rose over Red Mesa, the hidden settlement remained safe, for now. But Lila knew that the frontier was never quiet for long. Danger lurked around every corner, and the sheriff would not rest until he had what he wanted. But neither would they. Together, Lila and Tommy, along with the miners, had begun to turn the tide. The sheriff may have had power and weapons, but they had courage, cleverness, and hope. And sometimes that was all it took to change the course of a fight. Tomorrow, the battle would continue. But tonight, they had won. And for the first time in a long time, Lila felt something she had thought lost forever: a sense of belonging. The desert night was quiet now, but Lila knew that soon it would be filled with action again. She closed her eyes, ready to face whatever came next. With Tommy by her side, she knew she could meet any challenge. And Red Mesa, with all its danger and opportunity, was beginning to feel like home. The first light of dawn spread slowly over Red Mesa, turning the desert red cliffs into glowing orange towers. Lila Hartley stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the town below. Today, the sheriff would return. She knew it. His pride and greed would not allow him to give up after the humiliating defeat at the miners' settlement. Tommy Briggs appeared beside her, his small hands slipping into hers. He wore his oversized cowboy hat, determined to look brave. "Are we ready, Lila?" he asked. Lila squeezed his hand gently. "We have to be, little cowboy. Today, we face him. But remember, courage is not the absence of fear. It's acting even when you're afraid." Tommy nodded solemnly, understanding more than his age suggested. He had already faced danger before, and now he would face it again, side by side with the woman who had become his protector. Inside the settlement, the miners were making their final preparations. They moved silently, positioning droids' traps and supplies along the secret paths Lila had shown them. Mara, The leader approached Lila with a determined look. "You've done well," Mara said. "But the sheriff won't hold back. He'll come at full force. Are you ready for that?" Lila nodded. "I've been ready for a long time. I just didn't know it." The distant hum of hoverbikes reached their ears. Lila looked down toward Red Mesa and saw a column of dust rising as the sheriff's men approached. The sheriff himself rode at the front, his mechanical arm glinting in the sunlight. He had a cruel smile, but it was clear he was cautious. "Hartley," he called, his voice carrying across the canyon. "You cannot hide. Surrender now, and I might be merciful." Lila stepped forward, her voice strong and steady. "We're not hiding. We're ready for you, and we're not afraid." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He motioned to his men, and the attack began. Hoverbikes roared across the desert, racing toward the cliffs. Rocks tumbled down from the cliffs, and the miners' droids rolled into position. Lila's traps worked perfectly, causing the first line of attackers to stumble and slow down. Tommy, carrying a small rope he had tied to one of the mining carts, ran along the paths with fearless determination. He released the cart at just the right moment, sending it rolling down the slope and colliding with an approaching hoverbike. The sheriff's men cursed, momentarily distracted. Lila used the chaos to her advantage. She signaled to the miners, guiding them through the hidden paths and narrow passages. Using a mix of clever tricks, ropes, and small explosions from the droids, they forced the sheriff's men to retreat into the canyon's narrow choke points, where their numbers became useless. The sheriff finally reached the cliff's edge, realizing that brute force alone would not win him this fight. Lila moved closer, her eyes meeting his. "You've lost, Sheriff," she said firmly. "This town belongs to the people who live here, not the men who take what isn't theirs," he sneered. "You think you've won because of tricks and toys? You're a fool, Hartley, but soon you'll regret defying me." "Not today," Lila replied. She signaled to Mara, who activated a final trap, a net of cables and pulleys that swept the sheriff off balance, causing him to stumble onto a hovercart and crash into a pile of rocks. He was unharmed but trapped, unable to move without help. Tommy ran up to her, cheering. "We did it! We really did it!" Lila smiled down at him, brushing the sweat and dust from his forehead. "Yes, little cowboy, we really did it." The sheriff's men, seeing their leader trapped, retreated completely. Red Mesa's streets were quiet now, except for the wind carrying dust across the desert. The townspeople, who had been watching from a distance, slowly emerged, realizing that the tyranny of the sheriff was over. Mara approached Lila and Tommy. "You've saved us all," she said. "We owe you more than I can say." Lila shook her head. "No, we did this together. Everyone here helped. Even the smallest cowboy deserves credit."
She glanced at Tommy, who puffed out his chest proudly.
The sheriff, still tangled in the net, glared at Lila. "You may have won today, Hartley, but I'll return. Don't forget that." Lila's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "And we'll be ready. You're no longer feared here." After the confrontation, Lila and Tommy walked through the town. Red Mesa looked different now, cleaner, brighter, and free from the shadow of fear. The townsfolk nodded at them, some even offering thanks, food, and supplies. It was a new beginning. Tommy tugged at Lila's sleeve. "Do you think my daddy will come now?" he asked softly. Lila knelt beside him. "I think he will, and when he does, you'll see that some things are better than we imagine." Just then a figure appeared at the edge of town. Tommy's father, tall and kind-eyed, rode in on a hoverbike. He stopped when he saw Tommy and Lila together. "Tommy." "There you are," he shouted, jumping down. Tommy ran into his arms, laughing. "Daddy, we won! Lila helped us win." Lila watched as father and son hugged. She felt warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of family, hope, and belonging. Tommy's father looked at Lila, eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I can see why my son likes you so much. You're brave and amazing." Lila smiled, a little shyly. "It was nothing. We all did it together." Tommy, not willing to miss a moment, tugged at Lila's hand. "So, will you marry my daddy now?" he asked, eyes sparkling with hope. Lila laughed softly, kneeling to his level. "We'll see, little cowboy. For now, let's celebrate. There's plenty of work ahead, but for today, we can enjoy this victory." The townspeople gathered in the square, bringing food and water. They sang songs, clapped hands, and shared laughter, a sound that had been missing from Red Mesa for far too long. Lila felt a sense of peace settle over her, knowing that she had not only survived but helped others reclaim their lives. As night fell, the stars spread across the desert sky, bright and endless. Leela sat on the cliff's edge with Tommy at her side, the town glowing softly below them. She thought of the past, the abandoned wedding, the pain, the loneliness, but she also thought of the future. It was no longer filled with fear and despair. It was full of possibility, family, and courage. Tommy leaned against her shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed, Lila," he whispered. Lila kissed the top of his head. "So am I, little cowboy. So am I." The desert wind carried whispers of adventure, but tonight it also carried hope. Red Mesa had been freed from fear, and Lila Hartley had found something she thought she'd lost forever: a place to belong, people to protect, and a small cowboy who had reminded her that life could be beautiful even after heartbreak. And as the stars shone over the desert, Lila knew that she and Tommy, together with the miners and townsfolk, could face any challenge that came their way. The sheriff might return someday, but for now, Red Mesa was theirs. Together they had won, and together they had begun a new life.